Silence with Minister Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Love Bay family, we're rising out of the ashes together. Our topic on this evening is a nurse's perspective on domestic violence. Our guest co-host on tonight is Bob Wood, and our guest on tonight is Linda Wood. And I'm sure listeners that the last name sounds familiar to you. So I'm very thankful to have Linda here with us, which is Bob's beautiful wife. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for our guest or co-host, you can email us at sufferinandsilencedv@gmail.com. If you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, your faith organization, or just information that you would like for us to have that would be helpful to share that we can put out there, you can also email us at sufferinandsilencedv@gmail.com. And with that, Bob, if you would greet our listeners on tonight.
Good evening. Again, it's my honor and privilege to be here, especially this evening, because I know our guest for, about 43 years or so. She's put up with me. She's 44. See, I've already been corrected. Not until September. Anyway, she has been nominated for sainthood. I'll just leave it there. But no, she's very, 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 very proud, very honored to have Linda with us this evening, speaking from a nurse's perspective. And with that, I'm going to take a step back and let her introduce herself. This is my lovely wife, Linda Wood.
Well, thank you so very much for having me tonight. As Bob and Tia, Minister Tia have said, I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for over 30 years. And much of my career has been devoted to critical care. And I've done many, many emergency room shifts and many, many other critical care shifts. My current specialty is focused in transplant, and I facilitate transplants, living donors being evaluated to be a living donor for a transplant, kidney or liver, but my clinical focus is liver. But I do have a lot of experience in emergency rooms, and that is where we meet many victims of violence.
Thank you so much, Linda. Before I share some resources, Bob, you wanted to share some information with our listeners.
Yes, this is a very special day. If everybody can see and notice, I'm wearing red, and I always wear this red Jasper Stone bracelet. May 5th is MMIW Awareness Day, National Awareness Day. It's Murdered Missing Indigenous Women. And as the listeners know, we've had several programs and guests discussing that. And my statement for MMIW Awareness, Murdered Missing Indigenous Women Awareness, this is a good day for awareness, but every single day of the year is a good day to bring it to an end. So thank you for that moment. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And listeners, we want to share some information for you, with you from Pakistan. So the first resource that we have is War Against Rape, and their website is war.org.pk. And then we have Bedari, BEDARI. Their website is bedari.org.pk. We have the United Nations Development Program. For their information, their website is www.undp.org. And then we have the Acid Survivors Foundation. Their website is acidsurvivors.org. And with that, listeners, we move into our topic, a nurse's perspective on domestic violence. And Linda, there are a few questions that I do have in mind for you, but I wanted to ask you first if you could tell us about the code of ethics that we were just speaking about a few moments ago. So if you could please start with explaining to listeners what the code of ethics among nurses is.
Sure. The Nursing Code of Ethics is a doctrine that is that all nurses that are licensed in the United States must follow. Within the Code of Ethics, there are interpretive statements called provisions, and these provisions guide our practice. We are held accountable to these provisions in our practice, and if we default against any of these provisions, we could potentially lose our license. The most fundamental of the provisions are the first two, which are that a nurse's practice is driven by compassion and respect of the inherent dignity, worth, and the unique attributes of every person that we care for. The second provision requires that our primary commitment is to the patient, whether the patient is a single individual, a family, a group, a community, or a population.
So with that, it sounds like nurses fall under mandatory reporters. I know for us as a minister, as a teacher, like there are some individuals, just because of your job, who you are and what you do, you are mandatory reporters. So I assume that nurses fall in that category as well.
Yes, absolutely. Nurses, police officers, physicians, all healthcare workers really do fall under that mandatory reporting, and we're held accountable for that.
Okay, and that's not just a situation or issue of literally walking into a hospital, the emergency room. It's I would assume in a doctor's office.
It's everywhere.
Okay.
It is everywhere. As a mandatory reporter, it's not localized to just where we happen to work. It is in the community. If we're walking down the street and we see something, or we happen to be at a restaurant and we notice something, or anywhere out in the community or within our own specific practice location, if we see something, are concerned about a situation, it's our responsibility to report.
Okay. And so with that, I would ask if you could give our listeners just a bit more of your background as a nurse and your experience in dealing directly with victims and survivors of domestic violence.
Well, as I said, I've been a nurse for a long time, well over 30 years, and sometimes it feels like 100 years. But I have a master's in science and nursing. And I've devoted most of my practice to adult care, not to pediatric care. All of my practice has been really dedicated to the care of adults. But in my critical care background, and especially in emergency room work, much of the exposure I have had related to this particular topic has really been within the emergency room confines. And there it's our responsibility, as we're doing our assessment, to actually broach these subjects with patients, and if there are suspicions, to involve the necessary resources to come and assist that patient as well. So that's really where my exposure has been for many years.
So were you technically and professionally prepared to deal with domestic violence as you went into your nursing career, or were you taught what you needed to know and understand as a nurse, and did domestic violence come in just as an experience as you were actually working on a job and dealing with it, or were you specifically taught and prepared, this is something that you most likely will come into contact with?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Much of the curriculum within the nursing profession is focused on holistic medicine, meaning that we're looking at a global approach to care. And what that means is that we're looking not only at the clinical component, but the psychosocial component as well. But as far as the curriculum goes, there isn't a lot of heavy curriculum content that focuses on victims of violence. There are guidelines that we're educated in, but much of our experience comes from mentoring, comes from actually being in the field and actually dealing with the patients. There are guidelines that do specify the appropriate approach to a patient, how to speak to a patient, and listening is the biggest role that we can play. Because you need to allow the patient the time and the feelings of security to communicate their message without feeling judged and without being interrupted with a lot of questions. So we focus on allowing, we broach the subject in a very general manner, allow the patient to move forward at their own pace.
Okay, so I'll ask this question, and then Bob, I'll go to you for a question or comment. So with your experience, how would you prepare a nurse coming into the field to deal with issues concerning domestic violence? Because there are some things you just don't know until you know. So you do just have to have the experience. But with your experience, what you know, what you have learned, how would you prepare a nurse coming into this career?
The biggest thing I would advise a nurse is to look and see and to listen and hear. Those are the two biggest senses that we have that can guide our ability to help a patient. We assess patients, and in my mentoring of other nurses, I always say, look, don't just do that head to toe assessment, but actually look at the patient, look at them in the eyes, make that contact with the patient. You can tell a lot by looking at a patient's face, by looking at their body language, by listening to how they evade questions. And then that can help you suspect or make an assessment as to whether or not there is maybe some cause for concern. But you do have to look at the patient. It is a person. So you have to treat the patient as a person, not a medical record number, not a diagnosis.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Bob, I just have one more question. So once you make your assessment, once you come to whatever conclusion you have, and if you think a person is a victim or does need help, whether this person has said this to you or not, but if you can see signs of it and it's the conclusion that you came to, what's your next step? What should be the next step?
Well, the next step is to ask the patient if they feel safe if I leave the room for a moment, understanding that they're in a safe environment and that no one else will walk into that room without me being there with them. The next thing I would do was definitely report to the physician on call, but then certainly notify services like social work that we may have a concern that needs to be addressed, and with them being the specialists, they would come in and also assist with the patient's permission.
Okay, and that would be the same dealing with domestic violence or sexual assault, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. A lot of times there are situations where there are obvious issues. The person's been sexually assaulted, raped, battered, etc. But there are others where they come in, but the assault is deeper. The assault is gaslighting, or the patient is emotionally traumatized and fearful, and oftentimes, if the person that is doing this happens to be with the person, which a lot of times that occurs, they bring the patient to an emergency room or to seek medical care, but they want to control the situation because they want to control the person and protect themselves. And then many times we have to ask them to step out and speak to the patient one-on-one.
Bob, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Hi, how are you? Anyway, as you know, and and obviously my wife knows, before my career in education, I was a police officer. So our marriage is kind of like a TV show, a cop and a nurse. So, but that being said, what I was thinking about when you were talking, Lynn, was the interview process. The old interview process with police was sort of a check in the box type of thing. And, anybody that had any experience there knows that doesn't work. How would you, when you have a patient say that seems hesitant, how would you go about trying to broach that subject or get them to loosen up and talk to you openly?
Well, it's a challenge, and I don't know that there's an exact science in this. We're usually guided by broaching the subject with very broad spectrum questions, like, do you feel safe at home? Is there anything you feel we should know? Very, very broad. Have you ever been afraid, with your loved one or a partner? And we try to keep things very open-ended. Some challenges with patients, especially patients dealing with immediate trauma or immediately after trauma, kind of shut down. And you need to establish trust. And as a clinician, my goal is always to have the patient feel trusting in me. Because if they trust me, it enables me to do more of my job. And in this particular type of instance, it would be to help them and try to understand so I could make sure they have the services they need.
And while I'm on that, I know sane nurses receive this type of training because not many, just that all of what they do, if something goes to court, their documents will end up in court. Although we have our nursing program at Gwinnett, I don't know the precise curriculum and the components of the curriculum, so I'll make it relevant to you. When you went through Notre Dame in your nursing program, while I was finishing there, were interviewing techniques and talking with people who had been traumatized, those types of, like the experiential interview technique training that I've received, was that part of a program for nursing?
It is to a degree. We call it therapeutic communication, where it's very kind of open-ended. We are kind of given guidelines in how to progress through a conversation. We all have to do rotations in psychiatry, in psychosocial medicine and such.
Well, and viewers and listeners, just to remind you, sane nurses are sexual assault nurse examiners. Just to throw that out there. I do have another question for you, but I thought of a question to ask you before that one, Linda. Because I'm thinking about the process of, when you connect with a victim or survivor, or when you're connecting with a patient, there is a specific way that the conversation or questions need to be or should be handled. And for instance, I go see my doctor, just regular visits, regular checkup. I walk into a room and a nurse would give me this piece of paper and say, well, hey, I know everything is probably fine, but I have to ask you these questions, or I need you to look through this, and, and then we'll just get through it. And it's like, if I really had a serious problem, you just totally negated everything that has been happening to me. So I just want to talk about that for a moment. Like, there is a way that the conversation has to be approached, even if you don't believe anything's going on, even if you think everything is fine. Bedside manner is important, being flippant about it. And I mean, I've come in contact with anyone who was just blatantly mean, or they just didn't care, but it really was like, I'm checking off the boxes of what I have to do right now. I took your blood pressure. Now you look at these questions and let's get to the next part. So if you could just spend a moment and just talk about the way a person should be approached, because that's vital.
Well, again, the fundamental way to approach any patient is with respect, and to allow them their own personal space, because in many of these instances, these patients have had their personal space invaded and actually damaged. So many times when I'm speaking with a patient, and a lot of this is just out of experience, I ask questions, but I build questions into the conversation. I ask about them. I try to find a point of commonality that I can establish trust with. Do you have a partner? Are you married? Oh, how long have you been married? And I work questions of assessment into that. We have to do those questions. It's actually checklist items in every encounter that we have with every patient, male or female. That is usually done by a medical assistant, but we have to review them. But I can be honest with you, I very rarely ask those questions, rote questions like that. I build it into a conversation so it doesn't feel like an assessment. And I give them time, and I'll go back to things, and I'll say, you mentioned earlier that your partner doesn't like you to do this, and how does that make you feel? And were you ever scared when they said that? And then we'll go off on another tangent, and then I'll circle back and say, I noticed that you have a bruise on your wrist. How'd you do that? What happened there? Can you tell me about that? And I reassure them throughout my conversation and assessment that I am there for them and I am there to protect them.
Well, I have to tell you, Linda, you sound like Bob, which
No.
leads, and that's a good thing, and leads to my next question. So, can you tell us how or if Bob's experience as a police officer, a Title IX coordinator, his work with missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, how has his work and his career shaped and informed your views on domestic violence, or the work that you do when you come across domestic violence?
Well, he's really, Bob is amazing at what he does, and everything in his life, I feel very strongly, has led him to what he does now, has prepared him in many, many ways. And, in listening to him and understanding his approach to things has guided my practice in many ways. It truly has, and has made me a lot more sensitive to looking at what's unseen and listening to what's unsaid, and really listening between the lines. Mm-hmm. And I attribute, I hate to admit it, but I attribute it all to that man I have been attached to for 44 years.
Don't hate it. It's a good thing.
Right. I will clear this table right now. She is smarter than I am. I know that. I'm taking a big step back here.
Awesome. Well, Bob, I want to ask you, by that same token, has Linda's experience as a nurse, has that ever helped you in your dealings with domestic violence and sexual assault, the way that you either view issues or the way that you operate in your career? Has Linda's work had an effect on you?
Absolutely. I'll start my first career as a police officer, 99.9% of the time, if I ended up in an emergency room with somebody who had been traumatized, victimized, or was called in that immediate environment, it was chaos, especially as Linda said, because frequently you may have the partner there and you're trying to keep that situation under control. And at that point in my life, I obviously had a deep respect for all the nurses and doctors at the hospitals in the areas where I work. In fact, I was the guy that always brought coffee and donuts because I wanted them on my side. But I didn't have the deeper understanding I do of what they go through daily basis, the constant, the process at the level she's explained to me. And that kind of changes my viewpoint in looking at it in that perspective. As a Title IX coordinator, that's sort of been invaluable because, again, she and I will talk about ways that we have these conversations with individuals. We've both talked about the type of interview techniques and establishing a rapport with individuals, how important that is. As you heard her say, I know in the medical field they have less time to get that assessment than I do. I mean, I can have an interview with someone that could last an hour, however long it needs to go, it can go. They're a little bit more under the gun, but again, there's that that exchange of ideas and again establishing the rapport. So yeah, it's definitely given me newer insights or updated me.
Well, you guys really are like a television program.
Yeah, we are.
It would be cool to watch. It really would be. Love Bay, we want to welcome you again to Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern with the replay on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern, and also Thursdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Love Bay wants you to always remember that we're rising out of the ashes together. I want to share those resources with you again from Pakistan. War Against Rape. Their website is war.org.pk. Badari, Bedari. Their website is badari.org.pk. The United Nations Development Program, their website is www.undp.org. And then the Acid Survivors Foundation. Their website is acidsurvivors.org. And with that, I would ask you both this question. In your experience assisting victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, really because of what you do as a police officer, as a nurse, as a Title IX coordinator, how do you care for yourselves at the end of the day? Because I could just imagine how much it is to take in the trauma and to help someone else in their situation. But I mean, this is literally your jobs. So you're seeing several individuals every day. And it's not one of you, it's both of you. Literally both of you, your careers are vested in trauma of other individuals. So at the end of the day, how do you each care for yourselves?
Ladies first.
Bob punches a punching bag every day
for
for about 2 hours.
I knew that was coming.
I think it's important that everybody, no matter what you do, but especially in fields where there's a lot of stress, the nature of the job is stressful because you're dealing with other people's lives. It's really important to have a good work-life balance. And maintaining that and trying to separate yourself as much as possible when you're finished working that day, to step away from it. You need to decompress. You need to let the dust settle a bit, and you need to do a lot of self-care. For me, I like to get my nails done. I like to get my hair done. I like to watch, various television shows, and those shows are mindless, but for me, it helps me step away. And yes. It's thoughtless. It's just nothing. But it's very important to do so. If you don't, then you succumb to being burned out. And when you're burned out, you are not going to help yourself, and you're not going to be able to help the people who need your help. So work-life balance is really, really necessary.
Bob, how about you?
I will second that. Again, I'll start with my former career, being in law enforcement. When I was in, there was not that much attention paid to mental. I mean, there was leave the job at the job and go home. That's pretty much how it was. Which Linda will attest to. There were some things I'm sitting there going, I don't know how I can do that. I don't know
Yeah.
how to do that. It has improved in law enforcement, and across since I've gone, because I'm, as you can see, I'm the old man. That has improved in Title IX. I have spoken with a group, TICSA, the Association of Title IX Administrators. Several years ago, they gave an average of the life of a Title IX coordinator being somewhere between maybe 5-7 years, 7 being really, but 5 about was the norm, and people would move out of the positions just for that reason. There's a lot of carrying the trauma from the other person with you. I'm sorry, the word's escaping right now, but when you empathize and you absorb and again, you have to find a way to pull yourself back. And Lynn's right. I mean, for me, it's my exercises. My basement looks like a boxing gym. And that takes an edge off for me. Another one I like to do is my reading and just trying to learn about other things, moving into things like that. We she didn't get this one. We both had an old sideline career that we're looking at getting back into doing, like voiceovers and things like that. We just enjoyed it. But and the other one too is, I think, remind yourself to laugh at yourself occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean that, sometimes I see people that are so deeply serious with themselves, and they take a breath. Life's not that complicated. But that's it. You've got to find that outlet, no matter what. If it's walking in the woods, walk in the woods. I mean, unfortunately, the dog we have right now is a special need. We're working with him, but my older dog, Lynn will tell you, I'd just, he and I would go for an hour. We'd just be, we'd be out in the woods, and that was very therapeutic, to put it in plain and simple terms. So yeah, that's a definite. For anybody that's in services work, you have to do that.
Mm-hmm. So, Linda, I would ask you specifically from a nurse's perspective, with your personal experience, how can the general public, how can we help? How can we change or add assistance in dealing with the issue of domestic violence? Like, what do you see through a nurse's eyes that we can do to help make this situation better?
Well, I mean, if I may, it's really not a nurse's eyes, it's a person's eyes, because we are all accountable for each other. Every religion has an honor code to it that says, help your neighbor, welcome your neighbor, help whoever is in need. And we as citizens and as people need to be more aware and willing to help each other. And we've spoken about this before, but it's also very, very important for the general population to be educated about domestic violence and and partner violence, and understand what the warning signs are, and understand there are hand phrases that people do for that are in distress. Understand what those are and know what to do next to help that person. And a lot of onus is also on the state, local governments to improve access to services for people that are traumatized in any way.
Bob, you want to add to that, or do you have a question or a comment?
I want to add to that. I mean, that's my biggest soapbox at the moment is what she said: state, local, and federal legislature. there, you have to keep those lines of awareness open with the individuals. And I understand, I'm speaking from my lane and my perspective, which is sexual assault, domestic violence, and I'm right here. And our legislatures have lanes that are way out here. So people like us need to bring their focus back to it. And you do that by making a phone call, writing a letter. I can go online. There are several congressmen that are probably tired of hearing me or seeing my letters come in, which, and my wife has said the band's going to take me to Area 54 one night. But
yeah, we have an account specifically for bail money, just for that.
But I don't expect everybody to get out in the street and be an activist. But again, we have that right as citizens to say, hey, wait a minute, hold it, this is an issue. And you represent me. If you really want to you have a fiduciary responsibility as my representative to listen.
Yes.
So you have that right to do that. And I don't know if it will actually move the mountain, but I'll put it in these terms. If enough people make enough noise about it, somebody's going to hear it. Somebody will have to hear it.
But with that comes education. I mean, people have to be made aware. And the problem that I see is that these people that in the media, this is really swept under the rug. These types of topics make people uncomfortable, and it shouldn't make people uncomfortable. There are many services that people don't know are out there. And so it's incumbent on those people who are in the media to raise awareness, to show people what services are out there and highlight what are not, and what resources are for people to learn more about this. And if there aren't the resources, to step forward and be an agent of change. And an agent of change doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to Washington, D.C. or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or anywhere like that. It means to step forward and use your voice, write a letter, contact your local representative, talk at your church, spread the word. The more people that spread the word, the more comfortable people become in talking about the word. And then people can be more aware and be more actionable, be able to do things that actually help others.
May I?
Yes.
I don't like to be a statistics person, but when Linda said education is necessity, there were two things before our conversation tonight, besides pulling some other resources I'd like to get out later. But I found an old study from the World Health Organization that just highlighted interpartner violence and domestic violence. And the conclusion is that it is a world health problem.
Yes.
That is a huge conclusion. And that means that that educational, that has to grow if we're going to address this issue. Just in the United States alone, and this is more recent, this is from the CDC, and I'll just read the statement if you can bear with me. On average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. In 1 year, this equates to 10 million women and men. And that is a huge and totally unacceptable number. One is an unacceptable number, let alone 10 million.
Yes.
But I doubt very many people know these statistics. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, 1 in 7 women, 1 in 25 men have been injured by a partner. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked by a partner. And that statistic is growing because these little items are some of the best stalking tools in the world. And it's a shame. I know recently I was working with someone who is in a situation they're trying to sort out. and just getting the protections in place for that individual, you feel like you're pulling teeth almost. Just, to go through that entire system. And that's another issue. Many of the people that come in, I've escorted students to the magistrate to get a PFA. They have no idea of how that works. And it's difficult. Now there are advocacy agencies that do a marvelous job. But I'm saying on the bigger picture, and the advocacy agencies can only take so big of a caseload.
Right.
They do, and there's, I know, having taken people in to see magistrates to get a PFA, nobody was rude, nobody was impolite, but it's, well, here's your paperwork, sit down, sort it out. If you have a question, call me. Not too many people understand the legal document, that go through that. So
right.
that, we have to improve that some way, somehow. We have to work through that.
Well, and I just want to add to just a thought on the statistics, whether it be from the World Health Organization, whether it be from individual advocacy agencies, or even individual police departments. The numbers that are presented as bad as what it seems, because they seem to be high, they're actually higher than that, because those numbers are only based on people who actually report. There are so many more who don't say anything. So that number, as horrible as it is really a much higher, and not just the United States. We're talking around the globe, Asia, Europe, Africa, everywhere. Domestic violence touches us all everywhere. And just another point, again, listeners, the difference between domestic violence and partnership violence. When you talk about partnership, you're talking about two people. So you're talking about a relationship. So it could be husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend. You're talking about two people in an intimate relationship. Domestic violence occurs between people who are related. So it could be mother and child. It could be a child abusing parent. It could be siblings abusing each other. So domestic violence encompasses the whole family network. So just to put that out there again. Linda, I would ask you, is there a thought that you would like to share? Anything that you would like to add, or a question that maybe you have for Bob?
Well, I think, I think it would be good to hear Bob's interview technique. What was the name of the, what you follow? Because you follow the guideline, and I can't remember what it's called now.
The one is called what's known as FETI, Forensic Experiential Trauma Interview Technique. And the basis of that is, I talked a little bit about this, I think last week, Dr. Campbell, and the neurophysiology of trauma. But it's allowing the traumatized individual the latitude to tell their story. And in the FETI, that's the acronym for it, it also deals with the senses. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the specific details, but the gentleman who teaches this, we all remember the horrible incident at Fort Hood where there was that mass shooting. There was one individual who was wounded and rolled under a truck, and they wanted to interview the gentleman to try and jog his memory, and nothing was happening. They called in the gentleman who teaches FETI, and he listened, and about halfway through, he got into the senses. He asked the gentleman if he could remember what he smelled while he was laying under the truck, and the scent of honeysuckle came back to his memory because he was laying near honeysuckle bushes. They were right next to the truck, and all of a sudden they had a 3-hour story. It triggered the memory. So there are those things, and when I'm interviewing somebody and I'm looking for that story, if they're struggling, you look for that piece and you try to key in on that. And tell me a little bit more about what that picture looked like. Tell me a little bit more about that, and that will generally, that'll get something going in those terms. I recall in my other career as a police officer, as ironic as it seems, when I asked the gentleman if he could remember anything in general about his assailant, just general, I just laid it open. Tell me what you remember. he described vividly the tattoos and the colors of the tattoos on the arm. That is what his senses honed in on.
Mhm.
You know, lucky for me, I happen to knew somebody that fit those particular tattoos, so it worked out well. So that, you know, it is interesting in that you know, vein and concept. I'm going to turn this back to my wife. um, in my, you know, in my realm, it's in that capacity, trying to trigger that memory. And I know in your, well, like you said, you're dealing more in that physical. Tell me how this got here. Does that type of discussion enter into an interview?
I don't think it enters in as much as it should.
Okay.
You know, a lot of times, you know, we're limited. Sometimes we fall on a suspicion because the patient happens to be seeking care for another reason, and then you kind of, you know, stumble onto, you know, this situation that you suspect. And so a lot of times there isn't enough time to develop that, to have the patient take the time to say, you know, like, do you remember smells? Do you remember that? Because we're dealing with the usually the immediate aftermath. And with that, the patient at that point is usually locked up. You know, they're either in denial or unable to speak because they're just kind of in a locked in mode. And it makes it very challenging. And that's why on the clinical side of things, you have to establish trust. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially with someone who has just dealt with physical or emotional trauma, you know, and repeatedly deals with it at home. They don't trust anyone but themselves, really.
Yeah.
But in order to help them, you have to find you have to open a door in some way. And you know, over the years, you learn ways to establish trust quickly. Because a lot of it is trial and error. It should be much more scientific than that and evidence-based. But a lot of it is really trial and error in what works, and then you expound on that.
So, Linda, in your experience, have you had children as patients coming through the emergency room?
In all honesty, no. Whenever I did emergency room shifts, I would beg them not to give me the pediatric room or the GYN room. I would say, I'll take the trauma room. I'll take care of, you know, I'll do all that. Just don't give me the pediatric room. But so no, I do work in colleague with Children's Hospital. In my specialty now, we work directly in with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and many of the stories I see of children there are kind of scary because many of them are in life-threatening situations because of their home environment, but I have not clinically dealt with it. I did a pediatric rotation, but that was 150 years ago, and not necessarily going to be applicable here. But you know, I'm by no means you know, minimizing it. The challenge with children is mainly that children don't know how to communicate.
Yes.
They're afraid to communicate because they are always subordinate to an adult, and they don't have the life skills to be able to communicate. For an adult has the skills to communicate. They're just in a position where physically or emotionally they're unable to. But
Yes.
with a child, many of them are so internalized by the traumas that they've experienced. And those children are the children that grow up and are cutters and get into, you know, really bad situations, have suicidal ideations, have suicide attempts. And people say, well, I didn't know where did this come from? And they have no idea that child has been dealing with trauma since they were very young. that is a very unique specialty. I swear I give a lot of credit to SANE nurses and to nurses who focus on the pediatric population. That is a population that I think is very underserved and really needs a bigger voice.
Yes. Well, I totally agree. I completely understand. My ministry, the work that I do, is specifically geared towards adults. I work more with women than I do men, but I minister to and help men as well. In this area, I cannot minister to children. I wouldn't be able to handle it. So I know where my limitations are. You know, I have colleagues who have ministries that are specifically geared towards children, or organizations that are geared towards children. And I will tell them in a minute, I will write you a check. I will buy some toys. I just tell me what you physically need and I'll get that done. But if I walked into Children's Hospital, I would cry. I would want to hug and hold every baby, and I wouldn't be able to handle it. I wouldn't. But so I completely understand that. So I always know who I can call when I need them to step into specific situations.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you both. I think this is a simple question. I want to ask each of you, why did you enter into the careers that you stepped into? Like, why? Because it takes a lot to be a nurse. It takes a lot to be a police officer, a Title IX coordinator. There are some careers that are just, it's like your job is literally to sacrifice yourself mentally and physically for others. And I believe a police officer and nurse, I believe fits that category. So why did you choose to do what you do?
First.
Why do I always have to go first? For me, my initial career was in entertainment. I was a singer. I did musicals. That was what I truly, truly loved to do. When I chose to step away from that, when we were early in our marriage and we wanted to have a family, I was trying to identify what I wanted to be when I grew up, really. And and a friend of ours was a nurse. She was a neurosurgical ICU nurse. And she said to me, you have the right temperament to be a nurse. And I had never thought about being a clinical person in the past, but it had always interested me. And, the benefit of being a nurse is that there are many avenues of nursing that you can take that are clinical directions or non-clinical directions. So I happened upon nursing by the recommendation of a friend who knew me well enough to know what was inside. And I found a niche within nursing that is my niche. It's me. It represents me. It is a journey, and not people go into nursing and professions that don't recognize when it's just not right for them to do it. But when it is right for you to do it, you know it, and it feels right, and you're able to accomplish what you wish to accomplish. And that's what happened with me. I love what I do, and I've been doing it for over 30 years. So.
Wow. Bob?
Well, I guess, let's see, at 19, I had no idea what I wanted to do. At 20, was pretty much a train wreck looking for a place to have the accident. And there was a lot behind that. Lynn knows the full story. I come from a household with a lot of what we talked about. I've witnessed things being broken. I've stepped in between people. Made the comment, if you touch her again, I'm gonna, I've been down that road. And even as a teenager, I sought sanctuary out of the house. I mean, there were places where I spent the majority of my, most of my life, I'm thinking of one family whose house I was always in, and then when I outgrew that, I was always at the Q Club with my friends. My friends were my family, so to speak. And I think that kind of drove me in that direction, because I've always tried to fix what I thought was wrong. To this day, I don't do well with bullies, to put it bluntly. People that use their position, their authority, whatever, their power to, their hold a control over somebody. I've become much more level-headed about it.
So, I don't know. I think Linda wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I saw the face there. Be the first to admit, like I said, at 19, there were, moments. And the irony of that is Lynn will attest to this. There were 4 or 5 of us that, and unfortunately I'm the only one left. I've lost a lot of my very good friends, but we all kind of came from backgrounds where there were issues of this nature. And we met in our college day, and we gravitated, and we stayed friends for what, 40 some years, Lynn, something like that. And in very many ways, we're very similar backgrounds, very similar, that's not right, personalities. So yeah, I think, and again, it's funny, I'm looking at the literature here in front of me that talks about, what children go through in domestic, in situations where there's emotional violence, domestic violence. And I've always said this, I think, physical violence, obviously, you can see that. Emotional violence leaves scars that are really, really hard to get to. Yeah. And they have some really deep impacts on people. Self-esteem, not trusting yourself, things of that. Always trying to prove yourself. Sometimes always trying to prove yourself to yourself. And I know that sounds like a self journey, but somewhat it is. So that and that may also have driven me to the initial career choice, prove myself to myself. And so who knows? But as I said, going down the road, you learn and you adjust. And one thing I have learned in this environment, in this field, and as you know, again, in the MMIW cause, I'm thinking of a lady I work with who runs a program that helps people coming out of addiction and situations like that, that come from domestic violence situations. I find that the people who have had the experience tend to be the people who give back once they've had their journey, because they don't want to see that journey happen to someone else, or they want to try to ease that burden if they can. So
there's a statement: "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." And I think like when anybody goes into a field of service, whether it be as a police officer, as a Title IX coordinator, as a clinician, as a teacher, these are all fields of service. And when you develop in those fields, and when you develop, you find strengths within you that you didn't know you had, and it makes you a better person. And it sounds selfish to say that, but it really does make you a stronger person, and your strength gives you the ability to help others.
Yes. Well, I don't think that's selfish at all. I think it makes perfect sense.
I'll agree with that 100%. And if I may, I'll add this. As I said, at 19 and 20 and younger, and my wife will attest to this, I was a train wreck looking for a spot to happen. But when I found I was working, especially with children, victims, etc., that I needed not to be that train wreck if I was going to help that person. I had to make myself grow in that scenario. And so in many ways, as much as I've tried to give back to people, that there have been things that have been given back to me. I mean, I'll say this as somebody who's been in this business to this day, I've never forgotten the first person I worked with is in Title IX. The words "thank you, you're the only person that listened to me" have driven every step I've made since then. So that's important.
Well, I thank you both so much for being with us on tonight. I wholeheartedly respect you both for your career choices. I thank you for what you've done. My father, until the day he died, and he passed away, I believe, was 2018. Until the day he died, my father wanted me to be a police officer. Specifically, he wanted me to become a New York.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, he was at the top of the top, a New York police officer, and like I clearly knew he was just trying to live out his dream through me. But I told him, "Oh, I'm too nice to be a police officer. It's just not going to work. I do not have the temperament. I can't do it. So I respect what you do, what both of you do, and I appreciate you, and I thank you so much. We are at the hour. So Linda, I would ask you to leave our listeners with some final words on tonight. And I was just going to say a nurse's perspective, but as you said earlier, just your perspective, a caring, compassionate, mature human being, just words that you would leave with our listeners on tonight.
What I would say to everyone is be your voice. Don't be afraid of your voice. You are all worth every ounce of your being, and don't be fearful, and step forward and speak up. That's really, I think, the biggest message. Speak up.
Thank you so much. And Bob, I just thought about missing murder and Indigenous women. If you wanted to just say something just one more time before we close on the evening.
Absolutely. Speaking of education, there's an area where a great many people need to be educated, and I don't say that in any type of angst or what's wrong, because it hasn't been publicized properly, and it doesn't impact everybody on a daily basis, and you don't, if you don't see it and you don't know about it, you just don't react to it. And I think that's something that again, our legislators, media, etc., need to make a better effort in getting that out there. Because again, statistics right now, the number's unknown, but since 2016, close to 6,000 women, girls, men, boys, they have disappeared from within the indigenous. In fact, just before I came on the show in Baltimore this evening, there's an event that's commemorating two murdered women from one of the nations that's in Baltimore, and we need to get that knowledge out there.
Yes.
We need to know. If we're going to stop it, we have to know about it, and we have to take the right steps to bring it to an end.
Well, thank you both again so much.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from the program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We thank you so much for joining Suffering in Silence with Minister Tia here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Love Bay, we want you to remember that we are rising out of the ashes together. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.